Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on getting started on a farm or ranch transition plan. I'm very pleased to present our speaker, Joy Kirkpatrick, today. Joy comes from the University of Wisconsin Center for Dairy Profitability. She has 22 years of experience working with Extension, including her current work where she provides educational programs and information to farm businesses on succession planning. Joy received both her BS and her MS degrees from Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, near where she grew up on a diversified family farm. In 2005, Joy launched the Wisconsin Farm Succession Program, Returning to the Farm, which is an educational program for college juniors and seniors and their families. That is modeled after the Iowa State University and the University of Nebraska-Lincoln programs. That program helps juniors and seniors return to their family farms. In 2012, Joy led a project team to develop an educational program called Shifting Gears for Your Later Years Farming to help farmers develop their retirement plans. In 2013, Joy collaborated with John Baker, Dave Geller, Michael Thompson, and others to develop the Certified Farm Business Succession Train the Trainer program to help others offer farm succession courses. She has written numerous articles focusing on retirement planning and taught seminars throughout the U.S. on farm succession and farm succession facilitation. So I'm very happy that we have Joy with us today for our topic on getting started in farm transition planning. Now this is one of a three-part series on farm transition planning. In November, we'll be talking about opening the lines of communication, and in December, we'll be talking about making estate planning decisions. I'd like to remind everyone that you may type in questions or comments in the chat box at any time, and we'll also ask you for those questions throughout the presentation. At the end of the presentation, we'll have a survey link that you can provide some feedback on today's webinar, as well as suggest topics for future webinars. And we'll go ahead and send that to you if you include your email address in the chat box as well. So thank you for doing that. I see several of you have already done so. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Joy. Joy, again, thank you so much for being here, and we look forward to spending the next hour with you.
Thank you, Madeline. I appreciate being invited to do this webinar. I'm always happy to talk about farm succession to anybody who will listen, so it's always good to open it up to another audience. So I'll start with a few webinar logistics. My plan is, and I'm hoping that I've been able to put together the materials so that about 45 minutes of information and material, so we leave enough time for questions or discussion at the end, but we will sprinkle some of that question time throughout the webinar. So questions can be asked at any time through the chat feature, which I think most of you have already used to provide your email address. It will be recorded and available later if you would like to share this with anyone. And I have several materials that I will be referencing through the presentation, and those are available as PDFs over on the lower left-hand side of the screen. So there's several there that I have listed, and I'll reference those. Some of the reasons that they're there is because those materials are slides, but the print can be a little bit small, so you'll be able to look at that more clearly once you've downloaded and printed some of those out. And some of them are worksheets for you to be able to use, or as you're working through a farm succession plan. So Madeline did outline my background. I just want to talk just a little bit about, in addition to the formal programs such as returning to the farm, we also do one that's called Transferring the Farm in a High Stakes Era, and the Shifting Gears, which is focused a bit more on retirement planning. I also work individually with farm businesses. I work with the local extension educator, and what we can do is sit down and work with the farm business or farm family, help them think through some of these issues before they go to the professional attorneys or CPAs. We can help them think through a lot of what their goals might be, so then when they do meet with the professionals, they have a bit more clarity as to what they might be asking that professional to do for them. So, and on average, I work with about 30 farms a year in that way, in addition to the programs, the formal teaching programs that we do. So just to provide a little bit of what we're going to cover today, I do want to provide a few Iowa statistics to set the stage. I think that will be helpful. A lot of you may know a lot of those things, but I think that's always helpful to set the stage. We'll talk a little bit about defining the farm business succession planning and components of a farm succession plan, and then a blueprint. I call one of my materials that you have on the left-hand side, I call it the blueprint of farm succession, because when you think about all the components that you end up needing to consider or start working on, it can maybe seem a little overwhelming. So I try to put it into 3 steps that you're basically doing. There's lots of pieces of those steps, but to sort of be able to wrap your arms around what you need to be doing as you think about a farm succession plan. And then at the end of the presentation, there are a few things that you could do to start your farm's planning, and we'll talk a little bit about those. So the statistics that I have mostly are coming from the first statistic of 60% of Iowa farmers are over 55 years old comes from the 2012 Census of Agriculture. But some of the other materials that I'm going to talk about in this slide, and also some of the pieces in following slides, is from a 2014 Iowa Farm Poll Survey. So this is a survey that was mailed in February of 2014. A little over 2,200 were mailed out, and a little over 1,100 were mailed back, and responses that they could use. So there was actually a very good 51% response rate. Just to clarify that this poll is actually a panel survey, so the same farmers participate in multiple years. So it's not just a random survey that goes out to farms and you try to get a representative sample. This is a group of farms that have been polled in multiple years. So therefore, that may be why the response rate is a bit higher. And just to know that the participants in this poll are somewhat older on average than the general population of Iowa farmers. The average age for the people who responded to the poll is 65 years old, and the average age of Iowa farmers is about 57. So there's a slight differences, but I think that some of the information that comes from this 2014 poll, I think, will be really interesting and really ties in with a lot of the things that we talk about when we talk about farm succession. So one of the questions that the farm poll asks is a question about their retirement plan. So this one statistic that says 51% will either never retire or semi-retire, or they're already retired. Of those people who responded, 51% have either they're already semi-retired with no plans of fully retiring, or they're not retired yet, but they're thinking that they will only semi-retire. They were given 8 different sorts of answers that they could pick from with this question. Some of the questions were increments of when they plan to retire in the next either 5, 10, 15, or more than 15 years. But then they were also given the option to say that they would never retire from farming, Basically, that means the definition of that was that they would maintain full managerial control and provide some labor to the farm. They defined, the poll defined semi-retire of the farmer would provide some managerial control and or some labor to the farm. So when you put together the three pieces that talk about either, there's a big chunk of them that say they will never retire, or they will only semi-retire. So, but 61% of them say they will either never retire or semi-retire or they're already retired. So we've got over half that are going to be somehow contributing to that farm for several years coming up. Of those that are semi-retiring, 57% have identified a successor. So those are not the 57 that have identified a successor are not ones that don't. There's a big chunk of them that have identified a successor, so it's not that they don't have anyone to come up and take over for them. The other question I found interesting with this poll survey is the decision making that's happening between the farmer and the successor. So when we look at these statistics that we have on this slide, these numbers focus solely on those farmers who've indicated that they have a successor and that they either plan to retire within 5 years or who consider themselves to already be semi-retired. So there were several decision-making areas that they asked about, from making timing of operations, purchasing of machinery, deciding the level of inputs to use, negotiating sales of their products, deciding when to sell, keeping farm records, deciding when to pay bills, and planning the day-to-day work are just a few of the questions that they asked of these farmers. And they were able to choose that they could say that the farmer answering the poll was making those decisions alone. They could say that they were making the decisions but had input from the successor, or they could say those decisions were being made equally between themselves and the successor, or they could go the other direction where it's mostly the successor making the decisions with the owner farmer's input, older farmer's input. The successor alone would be the other choices. So what I find really interesting is that we have 55% of the farms reported that the timing of operations was divided equally with primarily the successors or solely the successors. So kind of going over to a little bit tipping in the scale of the successor having a little more decision making on the timing of operations. But when you think about the other pieces of 53% of the older farmers were either solely responsible or primarily responsible for record keeping. They were also, about that same number, were solely responsible or primarily responsible for deciding when to pay bills. And then the thing I found most surprising is that almost 58% of the older farmers were still solely or primarily responsible for planning the day-to-day work. And remember that the ones that were answering this particular question, the information that we see here are those who had already indicated that they were already semi-retired or planning on retiring within the next 5 years. So a lot of those higher level decisions about the farm management, farm business management, the record keeping and paying bills is still very much in the hands of that older owner generation. And I think that can, if there's not a plan for that next generation to be learning those skills, that can be a big detriment as that succeeding generation comes into more responsibility or ownership of that farm. The other question that they asked in this poll, when you think about nearly 1/3 of Iowa farmers are over the traditional retirement age of 65, and the survey asked reasons that many farmers delay retirement. And so the range, there were several statements that they could indicate were either not important reasons, somewhat important, important or very important reasons why farmers delay retirement. And 84% of the respondents of the survey said that the important part, farming is such an important part of their identity that is why they delay farming. And so 84% of those respondents said that was an important or very important reason that farmers delayed retirement. Another piece was they felt that modern equipment allows them to farm longer. So 82% felt that was very important or important. They feel that farmers may be healthier for longer. 75% thought that was important or very important compared to some other professions, that they feel that farmers may be healthier longer and be able to work and be in that operation longer. And then 75% indicated it was important or very important, that they love it so much, they love farming so much that they love it so much that they can't stop. Some of the other questions or statements were that they would have difficult time giving up control of a farm operation. Many farmers don't know what else they would do with their time. And so there were lots of things that they could identify, but these were the top 4 that were identified as reasons for farmers delaying retirement. So one of the important things, when I work with farm families or do presentations in the state of Wisconsin, I do talk a little bit about what is it that the main goal that you have. There's lots of goals that farm families have for planning for retirement, for planning farm succession, or some estate planning. But I like to be able to help them and know more clearly what direction they want to be heading. I do ask, there are some ways that I define farm succession versus estate planning. If the owner's priority is the continuation of the business, so that would be a transfer of labor, skills, income, assets, debt that goes along with those assets, and management responsibilities, then I feel that you're trying to determine if and how a viable business can be moving into the future for next generation. So that has lots of moving parts when you think about all of those different things needing to be eventually transferred to the next generation. There can be a progression, as most of you know, that a lot of times the labor will be the first thing that's transferred. A lot of times the next thing that's transferred that I found surprising is managing employees. So a lot of the things, obviously the things that the owner generation may find physically taxing or they don't enjoy as much as some of the other pieces are those things that will be transferred to that next generation first. But if the question is, if the owner's priority is the continuation of family ownership of that farmland, this is what I consider asset transfer. That's if that happens before death, or an estate plan if that transfer of that asset it happens after death. And so, while that can be a really important goal, it may not have as many moving parts as maybe the viable business moving into the future. So just being able to define what that owner generation is really wanting to have happen, what's important to them, and what their help with us as facilitators or educators knowing how to help them with those next steps. So this slide is very busy and has very small print on it. I apologize for that, but it is available as a PDF. You can look at it in a larger form, and it's called the Farm Succession Planning Beehive. in those downloads that are available to you. So when you think about this is the piece of thinking about it being a viable business that you transfer to the next generation. What I usually describe it, and this is actually based on a flowchart planning model by John Baker, who is at Iowa State University Beginning Farmer Center. So a lot of these components are things that he has defined. I have put it into a bit more of a visual flow of what I call the beehive, for a lack of a better description. When we, as facilitators or educators, we really emphasize starting on the left side of this page of this beehive, thinking about personal strategic planning, thinking about the values, vision, mission, goals that each individual that may be coming into this business has. Very rarely do we get a family to start right at that point. Then the next piece would be the essential planning skills of communication, decision-making, conflict resolution, and personnel management. Those are really important things to put into place and have discussions about how those are going to happen. The lower left is the business resource inventory, really looking at what assets you have, what are the components of that. And along with that is the financial analysis of is the farm profitable, is the cash flowing, what are the family living needs if you're bringing more people onto the farm. So if in an ideal world, we would have farm families working on that left side first, and ideally at the top with the personal visions and missions and values. So many times we have farmers, and then on the right-hand side, after you have those components, then it moves into that business strategic planning, transfer planning, thinking about how to transfer labor, management, income, assets, and some of those drill down into business entities and those sorts of things. There's the moving part of retirement planning that needs to be going on. What is going to happen? What's that person going to do if they're fully retired? When is that going to happen? Are they going to continue living on the farm? Is there, do they know what their expenses are, what they might be as they move forward? Healthcare needs and long-term care needs are, that's the unknown that continues to increase. It, I believe, some estimates are at 9% a year for those healthcare needs and long-term care needs. And then estate planning. A lot of the big questions of that are tax consequences, how to treat children fairly versus equally, all of the legal documents that need to be in place, and thinking about some of those powers of attorney as well. So on the right-hand side, a lot of those four different areas, the farm family may be working in several of them at the same time, because you can't just work, those can't be sort of silos where you get one done and move to the next, because they interact and impact each other so much. But when we start working with farm families, or if there's a call into the office or to me, a lot of times producers may want to start on the right side of that beehive, asking about different things and trying to get those technical pieces together. So when I'm talking about the questions and producers wanting to start on the right side of the beehive, here's some of the common questions that I have come in. Asking about business entities. Should they have a limited liability company or limited liability partnership, or depending on, do they need a corporation? Maybe they already have a corporation, and depending on what the corporation owns, how does that interact with how they may want to transfer that business? Tax consequences are a huge piece for farmers. Farmers are very good at minimizing their taxes through their farming careers. And so they're always interested in knowing the tax consequences as they move those assets. And obviously, because all of those assets have different sorts of tax implications, from all the way from dairy cattle that have been raised on the farm, so they have no basis. The feed that they have, if they're depending on if they're transferring feed as a sale or all the way the machinery that's been fully depreciated but still has value to the land that may have been purchased back in the 60s or even earlier, and the land appreciation that the appreciation back. Something that's become a question that's come up a lot in Wisconsin, because there have been some state changes on how aggressive the state is becoming with Medicaid recovery. There are lots of concerns, and how do they manage their assets so that if they have the assets to pay for their care, what does Medicaid do? And how does that work? And those are all different for different states. So I won't get into a lot of detail about that, but that's a big question. Trust, and kind of fall into that whole question of Medicaid recovery, because there may be some strategies using different types of trust. In the past few years, we have had more questions about concerns if they start transferring their assets. If they start selling assets or transferring to the next generation, what if there's divorce? And then questions of treating on and off farm heirs fairly. These are very common questions, and thinking about what they can do to start balancing that or making those decisions. Concerns about the financial capacity of the business to carry more people and the family living costs involved with that. If that's one of the first questions that come in, that's a really good place to start. And then sometimes the questions actually start with expansion or modernization questions, especially for those of us in Wisconsin, looking at the size of the dairy farm. It may have been fine for one family, but if you're bringing in a second family, do they need to add cows? Do they need to modernize their buildings so that they can accommodate the larger herd size? Are very common questions that come in first. So I think we'll stop there, because I want to talk about how we actually start getting families to move over to the left side. But I want to see if there are any questions at this point about any of the pieces that I've brought up. We can talk a little more specifically about some of those components of the beehive if there are any questions.
Hi, Joy. This is Madeline. As you can see there, I just had a question about sharing the balance sheet with the younger generation, because that was part of your beehive model there. That on the left-hand side, that the business resources be kind of cataloged and discussed. I was just curious what your experience was with that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Madeline. And I think that with a lot of the families, I find it's dependent on maybe how long that next generation's perhaps been a part of the business. When we do the returning to the farm, which we work with juniors, mostly juniors and seniors at UW-Platteville, they may be a part of the farm, but they're in college right now, so they are not as maybe a big part of the farm, depending on how far away they are from home. And then if they're coming back to the farm, most of the time we encourage them to be employees for a while. So there may be some hesitancy of that owner generation to share all of that financial information from the very beginning, because they're still feeling that their children are employees, perhaps. But I find that so that can be the case maybe at the very beginning, that they might be hesitant. If they continue to be hesitant after that child has been on the farm for a while, and has been an employee for a while and it's time for them to start moving into more management and maybe ownership, if there's still hesitancy at that point, that kind of raises a little bit of a red flag to me, because the way I describe it is, what if your son or daughter came home and said, I've got this great opportunity to buy into the local hardware store. I'm going to start out as an employee, or I've worked there for 3 years, and now they would like me to start, becoming a part owner of it. But they haven't shared any of the profitability numbers or how much debt they're carrying on the farm or on the hardware store. You would say you really need to know what you're getting into. So while people consider that because it's maybe family, or a lot of the farms that I work with, it's family coming in and not unrelated parties, that doesn't necessarily have to be shared. But I think it's really important that as they start buying into assets and becoming an integral part of the management, that they need to be sharing more of the financial information, which is almost exactly opposite of what's most likely happening when we look at what kinds of responsibilities that the next generation is taking over when you look at that farmer poll.
Thank you, Joy.
So, are there any other questions? If there are not, we'll move back. So, before the little owl with the little question mark, I talked about a lot of the common questions that come in as a first question. What we really like to do when we're working with farm businesses is move them over to that left side, because there's a plethora of answers when people ask about all of the different sorts of business entities, the strategies that can be used, the trust that can be used, all of the things that can happen on that right side. But maybe you don't need to know every single nitty-gritty detail of all of those different options, because we really need to know what you want to do, what your goals are, and a way to kind of backdoor into thinking about what the goals are for each of the individuals on the farm. I find that working with a farm family on that business resource inventory, looking at the farm, and then moving into financial analysis, or starting with the financial analysis and the business resource inventory at the same time, can really help bring the ideas together and think through. It's a tangible piece. It's not what are your values, what's your vision, because sometimes that can be a difficult first start for a lot of farm families, but this can be a really tangible way to get started. So what I try to do, so when you think about that beehive, there's lots of little pods and lots of little hives, and but what I try to help families think about is there's really 3 steps that you need to do through farm succession planning. You need to take a really good look at where's the farm now, thinking about all different types of aspects of the farm business, of the family, where's the farm and the family now, and then asking the question, where do you want to be, thinking about that visioning piece of what does everybody want, how quickly do they want that, and then the third question is, how do you get there? That's the part of, then you start bringing in some of those questions of what might work best, because you know where you want to be and you know where you are now. Then you can narrow down your options of some of those things that we talk about on the right side of the beehive. So, sometimes when I present this, the question comes up, we know what we're doing, so why do we need to evaluate where we are now? Well, I find, for one thing, if I don't have a lot of experience with the family, I need to know where the farm is now to help them move forward with the process. but also it's an opportunity for those owners, the owner generation, to take a step back from all of that day-to-day decision-making and be able to kind of take a little bit step back, look at it from a little higher plane, and kind of see how they have grown that business and move forward. So I think it's a really good opportunity for the owner generation to be able to say, we started here and now we're here, and this is because of the decisions that we've made. That can be really helpful for them to know that's the progress they've made. And then the next question is, does the next generation know the details like that owner generation does? You think that they may know it because they grew up there. They've been by your side, knowing all of and how to do things, but do they really know all the details like you do? And most especially if it's at a point where they need to know that those financial components, do they know the details like you do on that as well? And it allows people to be it puts everyone on the same page for knowing information. And sometimes that's really important to recognize that next generation, you're trying not, this can be an important turning point of you're not treating them as your children anymore, but you're treating them as potential business partners. And how would you talk and share with a potential business partner if they weren't your child? What would that information would they need to know to be able to be on the same page and knowing the details like you do? And then it helps set up the next step of where do you want to be. I think it's really important to take some time to look at where are you now so that you can feel comfortable having an idea of where you be. So thinking about where is the farm now, that's, the business resource inventory can be a place to start looking at the physical assets, the short-term, intermediate, and long-term property assets that you have. The financial statements, they can be started gathering those. Income statements, looking at ratios as well. That falls also into that financial analysis. It's really important to think about the production data and maybe trends of the production data over a few years. Thinking about personnel, what are the assets that everybody's bringing to the business? What are they doing? What are their skills? Are they in the right place? Are they sitting in the right place for their skills? Would be questions that you could start asking. So when I'm working with a farm family, as I said, I may not know much about them because I've been asked to come in from the county agent or the county educator, maybe asking me to come meet with them. So I really start that first meeting asking a lot about the history of the farm. When did that owner generation acquire it? How did they acquire it? Did they purchase it? Is it a century farm? And you can find out a lot when you think through this. You can start kind of teasing out some of the values that they might have, because if it's a century farm, you can maybe hear or understand that may be a value to them of that continuing in that family name. History of the family, knowing where the information about the children, how old they are, the birth order, are they married, do they have children, where do they live, what do they do? That's really important as you start thinking through some of that fair versus equal. Who is doing what? How are decisions being made? Who is making those decisions? And are they operational or strategic, long-term decisions, long-term planning? And how are the assets owned? Where does the farm now continue? Are the leases written? Are there business structures that actually own assets rather than the individuals owning assets? Evaluation of the quality of the livestock and the level of production, the quantity and quality of land. Is it the right quantity of land for the size of livestock production that you're doing, or do you have to think about as you expand the livestock herd? Does that also mean that you need more land for manure management? Thinking about the aging condition of machinery, because right now if the owner generation is owning it and it's time for that next generation to be maybe start building assets, looking at the different pieces of machinery and age and condition, then there can maybe be some consideration as to which of the generations should be purchasing that next piece of machinery. Facilities, is it what the condition is? Are the facilities, are they the right facilities for what you might be considering? And then housing needs for everybody who may be coming back to the farm or on the farm, or who needs to be closest to the livestock in the next few years might be some questions that need to be brought up as well. So with the financial analysis, a big component of that is the family living needs. What are those things? What are those pieces for that? Looking at profitability trends, some benchmarking, and then long range budgeting may be something that you need to do so that they can see where that is. So in that particular aspect, how is income distributed? How are expenses distributed? Sometimes those don't always make sense when you start really drilling down and working with families. So you need to kind of really drill down and think about, ask them those sorts of questions. With the financial information, when we work with farms on this, and I also work very closely with the Department of Ag Farm Center, who do a lot of this same work. The Farm Center asks for 3 years of balance sheet, 3 to 5 years of balance sheet and income statement, and then 3 to 5 years of parts of the 1040 and the Schedule F if there aren't income statements to look at, so that they can start looking at some trends analysis. You can look at some benchmarking and also some family living needs. You have to look at your family living needs. And then the question is, has the next generation seen the financial statement? And this goes to that question that Madeline had. Has it been profitable, and has it been cash flowing? If they don't know, if that younger generation does not have the information of seeing the financial statements and knowing if it's profitable and been cash flowing, how willing is the older generation to share this information? And if they aren't very willing, why? Those can be some really hard conversations to have, but that could be a really good start. So, with the family living expenses, we took this slide is, most of the information is from the Center for Farm Financial Management FinTech database, the FinBin database, looking at different types of farms. We have crop farms, dairy farms, hog farms, beef farms, and then the last column is dairy from our own AGFA database that's here at the Center for Dairy Profitability. We have our own database, but the numbers that you see underneath that last column are gathered differently or kind of sussed out differently than the way the FinBin does their family living expenses. AGFA database does not necessarily ask specifically for family living expenses, so this is a little different number when you look at it. So you have to consider that. So looking, and then on in the rows, there are different years, 2009 through 2013, a 5-year average. They even, FinBin has how many people are in the family and what that's supporting, and then divides that out per member. So as you can see, it can be variable through the years, and it's variable across different enterprises. If you consider dairy farms, if we have the 2014 year here, you may see that their family living expenses went up a little bit in 2014 because it was a pretty good year for dairy farmers. But, thinking about that, one thing that I will make a comment about, and it's just, we've had this discussion in just a few meetings that we've had in this past fall, is that, in the past, when it's one farm, one couple perhaps being the main sole proprietors of that farm, family living expenses a lot of times are basically what you have left over. It may be variable because if it's a tight year, family living expenses are going to be tightened down. if it's a good year, you may be a little more able to have more family living and have more disposable income. But what some people are seeing is as farms get bigger and there are more families being a part of the operation, doesn't necessarily, there's an expectation that the farm is going to provide a certain amount for family living, and it may not necessarily have the idea that if it's a bad year, tight belts need to be tightened. So you see that there can be some changes and some discussion that needs to happen so there's not conflict about that. So as Madeline is pointing out in the chat box, I did provide a worksheet called the Household Spending Plan that can help think through some of the costs and budgeting and be able to start thinking about what does that farm need to provide. Is it all of the family living? Is there off-farm employment that's going to provide some of that? And so that you can start thinking about what does the farm need to do for each person that's working on the farm, and then is the farm going to have that capacity or changes need to be made for that? I do need to step up the pace here. So where is the farm now? Pieces of, thinking about the management team, evaluating the management capacity of the incoming generation and making sure that there's a plan for skills development. And then don't forget about the professional services, the consultants you may use, and making sure that next generation is introduced to consultants as being either an employee that's going to be making some decisions or your business partner. Making sure that you make those introductions so that those professional consultants can also view your children as a partner. Okay, I'm going to stop quickly for questions, but then I think I'll just go on through. So where's the farm now? The next step, after you've been able to really pull together where's the farm now, the next step would be where do you want to be? And that's the values, vision, mission, goals, stakeholders who need to be involved in these discussions, and then start thinking about the strategic issues facing your farm and exploring the options that would address those strategic issues. So one thing, this worksheet is also a part of the downloads that you can have here. So what is your vision? This worksheet talks about 3 and 5 years from now, a personal vision of where do you live, what will you be doing, how are your living expenses paid. But then on the second page is what does the business do, who's managing it, how much ownership do you have in it. I like to have everybody that, especially the 2 generations, everybody in those generations answer this individually, and then I collect those and put them together in a matrix because it really helps me see if the timelines for both generations are in sync or if they're a little bit off, and that can be a discussion point that we use for the next conversation. A lot of times, when we talk about establishing goals, I've found that these are some of the sort of, I call them universal goals that we've found, and this has been done research by UW River Falls, and it's also very similar findings from a survey from South Dakota in 1997. So maintaining the long-term viability of the farm for future generations, providing for the financial security of the older generation, and the farm and the farmland remaining in the family. And depending on the situation, these could be complementary or they could be very conflicting. You have to really consider the goal. And then the last piece is the how do you get there. This is the strategy, tactics. This is when you start thinking about the different business entities, making sure that you consider the tax implications for all of those and try to put it together. This isn't always the end because it may not work out exactly, some of the things that you think will be the tactic or the strategies. When you start questioning and testing those, you may have to go back and kind of rethink where do you want to be and maybe go at it a little different direction. So in the where do you want to be and how do you get there, we're really working through a lot of the left side, but we're also moving over into the right side, the top piece of the business strategic planning. And the stumbling block a lot of times is that those essential planning skills with the communication, decision making, conflict resolution, and personnel management. The one thing that I will say is when you start bringing in a next generation, if it's been a sole proprietorship, maybe a husband and wife, trying to be transparent about decision making, helping, because that can help mentor the next generation to understand why and how decisions are made, and can also help alleviate some of the conflict, because if the next generation is always suggesting an idea and they're told no, but there's a good reason for it, you have to be transparent with decision making so that they understand why they may be told no in certain situations. So risks of not planning for farm succession. We all know these. The business will decline instead of grow. The assets may be distributed in a way that's not sustainable. The entering generation isn't provided adequate management experience to take over. When you think about that poll where the people who are retiring within 5 years or already semi-retired, if they haven't given the record keeping or at least start sharing that can be really important. Something unexpected that hasn't been planned for forces decisions the operators would not control. So what can you do? Increase your knowledge on the issues. I think that sometimes, we have those questions that come in, the common questions, and they tend to be on that right side of the beehive. In some instances, you have to get the answers to those questions, or that may be a mental barrier to the business. If they don't know the answer to that, they're not able to move back to the left side and look at the business analysis and the financial analysis. So you have to balance answering questions and finding information, but don't forget to go back to that left side and make sure that you know what your goals and your vision is. Start working on gathering information on where you are now. There is a checklist that is part of the PDFs that are available. Let me see. I think it's the farm succession facilitation process. No, it's the farm succession checklist with blueprints. So there's checklists that you can use to think through some of the things that you need to gather. Making sure that you have the personal visions of all involved in the operation and the family. You can use that worksheet to start that conversation. And then starting the conversation, I believe that Lori Sharmer from North Dakota will be talking a little bit more about starting the conversation with the next webinar. And then I think we talked a little bit about these, so I don't think I need to go over those again. And then these are all the resources that I've touched on briefly and used in the presentation. So those are the titles, and you have those in your you can download those. So I will stop. Okay, so Darcy has a question. How long does the process? Unfortunately, I'm going to give you sort of a lawyer answer. It depends. So depending on where they are in the process, when it's that young person that's maybe not even back on the farm yet, it can take some time, and you end up maybe revisiting that family again after you may set up some arrangements for their employees, and there's some skills development happening, and then there's a timeline as to when the next step would be with the management responsibilities. So in that case, that can take a long time. In some cases where they're already, maybe that next generation is already owning some of it, it really may be they're ready for more of that technical piece. You have to make sure that you question if they're ready with their personal vision. Everybody's on the same page about where they're going. But if it's more of those technical components, you may just be helping them clarify their issues they may be going to an attorney, and it can, happen in a matter of months. There have been times that I've worked with farm families. I've met with them once. They felt like they had what they needed to move on to work with the professionals. But most of the time, and especially if there's the financial analysis that needs to happen, I'm guessing we're usually working with them 9 months to a year. You're welcome. Any other questions?
Joy, this is Madeline, and just curious about the 9 months to a year. When you start working with families, what's their perception of how long this is going to take?
Usually, they're thinking most of the time is less time than that.
Mm-hmm. It takes a little longer than they expect.
Yeah, but I'm thinking of one family in particular. The younger generation has been working on the farm for a few years. The owner generation wanted to start thinking about moving it in a direction of having that next generation have some ownership. I started meeting with them in July, and they wanted to have it done by the end of the year, but there were lots of communication components, values that were conflicting between the two generations, lots of things that were sort of hadn't been addressed, and it ended up, not only did they not get their plan together in 6 months, they decided to step back and give it another year or so that they could work out some of the ideas of can they farm together, or does it need to be a little bit of a different transition, because the owner generation were only in their 50s, so they had quite a few years that they were still planning on farming. And if values and the communication wasn't there, that would be a long time to work with somebody that there was constant conflict. So they decided to step back a little bit and regroup, and so they're moving through some other steps, some estate planning, so that they had those in place. But the business succession planning has kind of cooled down a little bit.
Very good. So as you're working with families, are there times when they may have conflicts that you feel like you can't help them with? And if that happens, what are some alternatives?
Yeah, the expectation, and I see Darcy has a question too. I want to make sure and get back to hers as well.
Yes, please do.
The expectation is that hopefully they're at a level that the function, the family is not so dysfunctional that you can't move forward. There have been some cases that conflict is so embedded, it's baggage, family baggage that a farm succession plan is not going to fix. That's just not what a farm succession plan can really do. If they're just hesitant about talking, but they still have a good relationship, that's a family that you can work with. When we find that they may be at a level that the conflict is too great, we do have free mediation services for farmers in the state of Wisconsin. That service is offered through the Department of Ag, Trade and Consumer Protection, through the Farm Center, so that there are trained volunteers all over the state that can help mediate conflicts. We do, and the Farm Center also has family counseling vouchers. If they feel like if the family's open to actually having some counseling, they may be able to have some of that paid for. And then we do have a couple of farm family communications consultants that will do that work for a fee, but can really help people work through that.
Thank you.
With Darcy's question, I'm thinking it's going to be more hard copy, and I would consider some sort of binder with those plastic sheets that maybe they can put their materials in so they don't have to three-hole punch any legal documents or deeds or anything like that. But thinking about organizing that in sort of a 3-ring binder is what I would usually suggest. You know, if the family is technically savvy and can scan things and put them on a thumb drive, you know, maybe that would be a little more compact way to do it. But mostly the things that they're going to be gathering are could be easily done hard copy.
Well, thank you so much, Joy, and thank you, Darcy, for your questions. We appreciate everyone's attendance today. Remember that the webinar will be archived at the eExtension Learn site, so you can share it with others later on or review it as part of the series as the series goes on. So thank you very much, Joy. We really appreciate you sharing all of your experience with us today, and we look forward to continuing our series on farm transition planning next month with the webinar on opening the lines of communication, followed by making estate planning decisions. Well, thanks again, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day now.
Thanks.